Welcome to Into the Multiverse, a podcast brought to you by Supermush, where we believe that mushrooms can actually change the world, and that if humans mirrored the magic and wisdom of the fungi kingdom, we would have a far more joyous and connected planet. Each week, we'll be meeting with thought leaders and experts to extract the best insights and stories across everything from functional fungi, psychedelic medicine, and so much more. Thanks for listening. Step into the multiverse with us. Hi guys, for this episode of Into the Multiverse, we are doing something a little bit different. We are resurfacing our first ever Into the Multiverse podcast episode, recorded over 3 years ago, with Danielle Broida, who is a friend of mine, the national educator at Four Sigmatic, a registered herbalist, and a certified holistic nutritionist. And more than that, she is one of the most educated people that I know when it comes to the entire world of fungi. It was actually a huge inspiration for me to get into the mushroom space from my conversations with Danielle. On this episode, we dive into all things functional mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, the mycelium network, and how all of them are changing the world. We also get to hear a little bit more about Danielle's story and how the fungi kingdom found her and led her to where she is today. Please enjoy the following conversation with Danielle Broida.
We're finally ready, it seems, as the Western world to remember connection. And I truly believe the best teachers of connection are fungi.
Welcome to the Multiverse, where we believe that mushrooms can actually save the world. Each week, we'll be meeting with thought leaders and experts to extract the best insights and stories across everything from functional fungi, psychedelic medicine, and so much more. Thanks for listening. Step into the multiverse with us. Hey guys, welcome to the show. My name is Ali Shaper, and I will be your host. I'm also the co-founder of a company called The Multiverse, which is the world's first mushroom marketplace, which we started to educate people about mushrooms and collect the best products and information all in one place. Today, on the first episode of Into the Multiverse, our podcast, we have one of my good friends, Danielle Broida, one of the most educated people I know when it comes to mushrooms. She is a registered herbalist, holistic nutritionist, and the national educator for one of my favorite brands, one of the most inspirational brands to my personal journey with mushrooms, Four Sigmatic. So, can't wait to go on this journey together. Let's dive in. Hello, I'm so excited to finally be doing this. Just for a little context and background for everyone listening, Danielle, who's here today, was one of the main reasons why I got into the mushroom space to begin with. And you really helped me transition from being a consumer of the space to really wanting to dedicate my life to it. So thank you so much for that, first of all, because part of the reason why we're recording this podcast and part of the reason why we created the Multiverse was inspired from conversations and events that we were doing together. So
amazing. Yeah, I hope we can all be little seeds, little spores. And that's part of the magic of this work, is when we're inspired and we're kind of caught in, the multiverse, the mycoverse, we can hopefully live that and breathe it, and it's contagious, right? Like mycelium running. And so I just feel grateful to have been part of that hyphal thread that you were then merged onto and could take it on your own path.
It's been such a wonderful 2 years learning more about the space, and our early on conversations that really got me fascinated is why I'm so excited to talk to you today, because you are such a wealth of knowledge. And you're one of the first guests we're bringing on to the podcast. And I'm so excited about that because you probably know more about mushrooms than most people I know. And we can't fit it all into this podcast conversation, but we're going to try to get as much goodness as we can out of your brain into the world. I know you talk about this stuff all day, every day, but before we kind of dive into what are mushrooms? What is the fungi kingdom? Why are they good for you? And all of that. We'll cover all that, but I would love for you to share how you landed here and why you decided to dedicate your life to mushrooms.
Great question. I like to think of the path of fungi as really organic and you can't choose it. And the more that you try to choose it or the more you try to go after it, the more it's going to hide itself from you. And so being really open and surrendering and just kind of trusting is when I find that you're open and able to merge with the fungi. And so I had no intention ever of dedicating my life to mycology and this whole world of fungi. And it was really one step at a time where they kept appearing. And it was only when I fully surrendered and was like, oh, this is really so obvious that I can no longer look in any other direction, that it was like, okay, I need to step full force 2 feet into this world. And when I look back, there were so many chapters that the fungi were kind of rearing their heads. So when I was younger, I was a big environmentalist and I started being a plant-based eater, which includes, now we should have a new name, like flora and fungi based eater, right? It's no longer like plants. Like, hello, the mushrooms are part of that. When I was 8 years old, and it was so out of the norm, and no one in my family did it. And I was like, I want to be more connected to my food. And it started with really just asking questions and being like, where does this come from? My parents would be like, why do you want to know that? Why do you care about where this thing on your plate comes from? And it really grew and grew. And I became a big environmentalist. And I always was fascinated by connection and the root of things and what wasn't being said, what wasn't on the table, and why, right? So, like, why isn't this part of the conversation? And there's so much juiciness there. And so, even within the world of, environmental health, it's so much more obvious to look at the things that are kind of shiny or big. And I kept coming back to, like, okay, the root, the root, the root. And initially that brought me to soil health. And I was really big into compost and actually spent 4 years learning about industrial composting. And within that, I started understanding mycorrhiza, which is myco fungi and rhizo root. So these symbiotic fungi that all plants on earth, the fact is 90%, but I think we just haven't discovered the other 10% of plants that depend on this symbiotic species of fungi to ensure their health and survival. And so it started with soil, and then it really kind of morphed. And I've always been really fascinated by other cultures and travel. And so after my undergrad, I bought a one-way ticket to Asia and started working in hill tribe villages all over Southeast Asia, northern India. My home base was in northern Thailand. And this is probably not a surprise to most, but fungi are much more alive and praised and revered and eaten in Asian cultures than they are in the West. And so, again, really slyly, without me realizing that they were being like, okay, Danielle, like, look at us, they were making an appearance in my life. And working with these hill tribes, I was studying plant medicine and forest medicine, literally going out and foraging our food and herbs and fungi. And I was like, okay, this is cool. This is just part of the materia medica, the part of the repertoire. And again, didn't really realize how potent of a kind of stance they were taking for me. And after about 3 years in Asia, I ended up moving back to the States. I went to Colorado to study herbal medicine and really formalize my education. And again, there were no classes on mycology in my entire graduate school program on herbal medicine. This was crazy. I was like, why isn't this being talked about? And I started, which most people, you and I both included, have this similar story of really needing to go out and find the fungi information on our own. And so I started growing mushrooms. I learned how to grow from Peter McCoy, who's wonderful, and we'll give lots of resources later. And just like diving into, why isn't this being talked about? What is the potency here? What's the medicine? And when I opened my clinical practice, again, this was kind of the solidification where I had all of these clients coming to me that had said, I have tried everyone and you're my last resort. And most of these individuals had chronic illness, autoimmune conditions, and frankly, ailments that the Western world said, this doesn't exist. There's nothing wrong with you. And, we've had many conversations about mold and potential autoimmunity and misdiagnoses. And so this is really real in both of our lives. And it's really challenging when someone says, you don't have something wrong with you, nothing exists. And they were after, so many years, both in Asia through graduate school of studying all these plants, I found there were very few plant medicines that were effective enough directly when it comes to the immune system in these range of bodies. So being both effective and being safe was really, really key. And the fungi reared their heads again. And before I knew it, I was having a functional mushroom-based practice. So they were the central species in all the formulations that I was creating for my clients. And I just was blown away by the success and the results I was seeing in people that had spent 10 to 50 years trying everything else to heal themselves. And within a couple weeks to a couple months of utilizing functional mushroom medicine, they were getting better. And they were having this sense of raised vitality. We can talk about this, through TCM or Ayurveda, so many traditional systems of medicine. It's not about treating the symptom. It's about an underlying imbalance in the body. And this is where our functional mushrooms shine. They raise that baseline. They nourish our foundation. They nourish our roots. And so the life force was coming back. And I just knew that I had to devote my life to these species and to get the medicine to as many people as possible. And there were very few brands that were doing this at the time. And lots of synchronicity and things ended up happening where I joined forces with Four Sigmatic about 3.5 years ago now, and have worn pretty much every hat there, as you know. But really what I feel we're doing is reviving this medicine and offering it in a way that the majority of people, no matter where you live or what your lifestyle is like or what state of health you're approaching this fungi medicine from, that it can start to work with you and you can work with it and start receiving the benefits.
It's such an amazing story. And I think that I have a lot of comments on, a few of the things that you said, but what really stuck out to me and about what you said and what really stuck out to me personally, why I became so fascinated with this space is because of reading about people and case studies that had tried everything else,
Yep.
whether it was for mental health or for, just general immunity or like autoimmune diseases, and came to psilocybin,
Yep.
came to experience the psychedelic, part of magic mushrooms, or started trying chaga or reishi. And it's been there all along, right? Like it's the root system of most things
Yes.
in the world. But it's just now being talked about on a larger scale,
Mm.
and learning about how many people went to, 10, 20 years with, they just thought that this is how they were supposed to live, and then discovering mushrooms and either having, a crazy psychedelic experience that totally changed their life, or incorporating functional mushrooms, non-psychedelic mushrooms into their life. And
Yes.
it just totally rewiring their entire system. And the fact that that's from the same kingdom is so fascinating. But most people really don't know how to connect the two. So if we can just briefly kind of talk about, you give one of the best definitions of functional mushrooms that I've heard. Can
Oh.
you just explain to people that maybe are new to mushrooms, what are functional mushrooms, and kind of the connection between also psychedelic and just overall the fungi kingdom? I think that's like a really helpful place to start. And we
Sure.
can kind of go deeper from there.
Yeah. So it wasn't until the 70s that fungi were put into their own kingdom, which is fascinating. Really, yeah. So within the last 50 years. So even the knowledge that we've all gained, I always like to preface that like we know very little and we're still learning. And how can we like be sponges, and no matter what we say today, just like know that there's always more and keep questioning. And I think that's the medicine of the mushrooms. But fungi are their own biological kingdom. So much like the plant kingdom, animal kingdom, this is a separate kingdom. And before the 70s, they were just thought to be this lower form of plant. And then biologists and mycologists now started realizing, oh, these have nothing to do with plants. We as humans are actually closer related to fungi than we are to plants. Right? We share something like 40 to 50% of our DNA with them, which is why a lot of the defenses that fungi use out in nature to protect themselves, we can actually eat or make tea out of those same fungi and have similar benefits of protecting ourselves against dangerous fungi or, bacterias or microorganisms that we don't want in our system. So that DNA thing, we'll come back to that. But within this fungal kingdom, it's massive. We're still discovering how many species actually exist within the kingdom. Um, but what we do know is there's at least 6 times as many fungi species on Earth as there are all plants, which is just wild. So often people think the word mushroom and there's a very specific image that comes in their head, right? Typically I hear they're culinary mushrooms, right? There's our Agaricus bisporus or our button mushroom, which is also the portobello. It's the same mushroom at different phases of its life cycle. But typically that like culinary mushroom or poisonous mushroom, right? We think of the mushroom emoji, the Amanita muscaria, the world's most famous mushroom that no one knows the name of, but the red mushroom with the white dots, or psychedelic mushrooms. And beyond those 3 categories, there's this whole other world of functional mushrooms. And a really basic distinction out in the wild is all the 3 categories of culinary, psychedelic, and poisonous mushrooms are primarily growing from the earth, and functional mushrooms are primarily growing from trees. And this category of functional species, there's about 700 of them. And they're essentially mushrooms that have known studied benefits to the human body. In several traditions like Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, these are some of the oldest natural medicines that have been used for 3, 5 to 10,000 years, depending on the part of the world that we're pointing to that origin story. So as you mentioned, it's nothing new. Us as humans have not only used these functional species, we've relied on them. Some of them have been currency. Some of them have been utility. Some of them have been food. They've been medicine. And so for many cultures, we couldn't even think about what our life would be like without this allyship with these functional species. And when we look at the state of especially the Western world, I see so much disconnection from ourselves, disconnection from the planet. We were talking earlier about, looking at different bags or supplements, being like, what's in here? Where did this come from? And we're starting to ask those questions again and remember that there's value and there's so much depth in understanding source. And I think true healing can only come from that state of connection. And we're finally ready, it seems, as the Western world to remember connection. And I truly believe the best teachers of connection are fungi.
Beautiful. I think that just to double click on the point about being disconnected from the products that we see today, why Four Sigmatic is so inspiring. And honestly, Four Sigmatic has put mushrooms on the map for a lot of people I know. A lot of brand founders I know in the mushroom space started using Four Sigmatic and then, had crazy health transformations, were so inspired, and then decided to create their own. But Four Sigmatic was, for me and most of the people in my immediate world, the pioneer in that space. And even still, people that interact with Four Sigmatic, there is still a disconnect just by the nature of how we run our world, where you go and shop in the grocery store and you buy most of the things that go into your body that come in a package. And I think what would be really cool for people to understand is, because Four Sigmatic makes, and you can explain the wider variety of products that you guys offer, everything from powders to skincare to protein powders. You guys also had mushroom chocolate. Somehow that is not no longer on the website, and I'm really upset about it. But you make all of these products. Can you just explain a little bit about how you get the mushrooms from, whether it be growing on trees, growing indoors, growing outside? Like, how does just that supply chain come together in the final format?
Yeah, great question. So Four Sigmatic honors the way these mushrooms have been used for thousands of years. And that's something that is actually really unique about our brand. And there's a few pieces that go into this. The first is what part of the mushroom we're using. And so for all these thousands of years, as we talk about the culture and the history of use and the old materia medicas from these traditional systems of medicine, the part of the mushroom they were using was always the fruiting body, right? The real mushroom, the mushroom itself. This is the part that grows on the side of trees, or, for culinary varieties, the part that grows above ground. And the other parts that we find on the marketplace today, we see mycelium, we see spores. This is all relatively new. And there's definitely a place for innovation. But when it comes to Four Sigmatic, we're really tapping into these traditional ways of use and carrying them on. I like to think we're just reviving the tradition and kind of putting it in a funky new format that makes sense for the modern world. But the first part, so, is using that real mushroom, the fruiting body itself. The second part of what we do is ensure that the mushrooms are always grown on the substrate, which means the medium it's grown on that mimics what it's found on in nature. And so, depending on certain sustainability issues, we'll either go out and wild harvest, which means you go out into the forest and gather the fungi from its native land. One of the mushrooms we're really passionate about doing that with is chaga, Enotus obliquus. So we source our chaga from the largest birch forest in the world because it grows on birch trees primarily. And that's called the taiga. It's located in Siberia. It's boreal forest. Other species, it's actually more sustainable to grow in a farmed setting, which is really different. If people haven't seen a mushroom farm, maybe we'll link some
We'll show a visual.
images.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not growing from the ground. So it's actually, there's these shelves that you grow mushrooms from, and then they're in bags of substrate. And ideally, for highest quality, that substrate is wood, right? It's basically a wood chip that mimics what those species are found on in nature. So when we think about this part, it's actually so much more important than I think most people speak on. It really is, we're so obsessed with, like, we are what we eat, rightly so. Everything that we put in our body gives certain messages and gives us the fuel to react in whatever way we're going to show up in the world, right? Whether we're depleted on the couch or whether we have all this energy, it depends on what we're putting in us. Remember, fungi have 40 to 50% of our shared DNA. And so what we feed the mushrooms is critical to how they are going to show up, what actions they're going to possess, what phytochemicals they're going to show. And so feeding the mushrooms what they evolved to grow, what they evolved to eat, is like a massive test of quality. The wild harvested or log grown. And then the third thing that we always do, and part of this production process, is extract our fungi. And this is also vitally important. All three of these are like so big. So we can't actually absorb the medicine from our fungi if they have not been properly extracted. And this is because they have this compound in their cell wall. It's called chitin. It's the same compound found in crustaceans. So think of like a lobster, crab, shrimp shell. And if we try to swallow a lobster shell, it's pretty much going to act like insoluble fiber, right? It's not necessarily bad. Fiber is awesome for another podcast. But it basically acts, kind of like a brush through our intestines. And when we extract, so essentially what we need to do is break open that chitin in the cell wall so that the polysaccharides, the triterpenes, all these incredible nutrients in the fungi can actually become bioavailable to our body. There's a couple ways to do that, which we can get into. But really, I want to drive home the point that at Four Sigmatic, we use the fruiting body. We grow our mushrooms on the woods they have always grown on in nature, and we extract them properly. And then kind of like the two bonus, so those would like the three foundation, is cleanliness. This is important with all of our food, but particularly with fungi, they're bioaccumulators. And this is where we see a lot of the work with mycoremediation, these really cool projects of seeing how fungi can actually absorb toxins from a given substrate, be it, heavy metals, or even seeing projects of inoculating spores into toxic waste sites and seeing if they can clean that up. My teacher, Peter McCoy, would feed oyster spores to dirty cigarette butts, and they would actually break down the cigarette butts and then turn it into fruiting body and dissolve that toxic waste. So they're great at being able to turn toxicity into a new morphed format. And yet when it comes to our health, we have to be aware of this. And so, yeah, organic is almost like really so critical, the first line of defense to ensure that we're actually getting a clean product that isn't riddled with molds, yeasts, mycotoxins, radiation, pesticides, heavy metals. And then furthermore, all of our mushroom products should really be third-party laboratory tested to ensure that they are really clean and void of anything that might make our bodies worse off than if we were to consume them in the first place. So we do all of that at Four Sigmatic. And then our kind of special sauce is putting them in a format that makes it easy. Easy is so key because no matter how good something is for you, and I saw this so much in clinical practice, it was like, this is the most incredible species in the world. Like, this is this reishi mushroom, and it's perfect for what you're dealing with. And if it tastes horrible or if it's hard to use, my clients wouldn't do it. I'm like, oh, okay, we need to solve this problem somehow. And so at Four Sigmatic, we basically looked at what are people doing every day?
Hi guys, taking a brief second away from the show to tell you a little bit about our sponsor. Supermush is our brand inspired by the 60s and 70s that makes the most delicious and effective functional mushroom supplements. Our newest and best-selling products are Sex, Energy, and Sleep Gummies. They're sugar-free, they're delicious, and for listeners of this podcast, we have a special discount code for you. It's ITM15, and if you want to try our gummies, use ITM15 at checkout. You can find all these products at supermush.com.
What are the habits that already exist? How can we make it so easy to incorporate these species into our morning, our evening, and maybe even sometime midday? And so that's where our innovation comes from, is creating things like mushroom coffee and mushroom cacao mixes and proteins and skincare, right? These are all routines. These are all things we're not going to necessarily give up. And so we're constantly looking at what are people doing? What do people enjoy doing? What is the taste profile that people are craving? And how can we almost slyly sneak the most powerful foods and medicines on the planet into these existing habits?
And you guys have done such a good job of that. I think, so there's kind of two separate things that you said that I think are really interesting. One is just in that, answer to my first question, you just covered so much range of what mushrooms can do. They can eat toxins out of the air, or they can reverse environmental damage. They can clean up oil spills. They can create supplements that can revitalize our health. They can create psychoactive chemicals that can really, really help our minds. And the last piece, which you and I have talked about at length before, is using mycelium, which is the underground root structure of mushrooms, to create packaging. And that's a whole other industry and a whole other conversation. But wherever you look with a lot of the world's problems, there is a mushroom that can be applied to it, which is just that for me and for most people, when you really uncover the range and the width and the depth of what mushrooms can do, it's incredible. And then on the second hand, I think what's so interesting about Four Sigmatic and the modalities that you guys have chosen to create, and also the dedication to the process and really how focused you guys are on education, is so key. Because when we started the multiverse, which Four Sigmatic is now on the multiverse as of like last week, which I'm really excited about.
Same.
When we first started this process, there was, Four Sigmatic, a few other really big brands, but we thought there was maybe 50 or so mushroom brands out there. We've now touched base with almost, I think, 300. And so many of these brands, some of them are incredible. But, the reason why we created the multiverse is to vet the products and make sure that they're adhering to the standards that both you and I believe in, with fruiting body, certain, amount of mushrooms, if it's for supplemental purposes, and all of these things. But so many people are creating mushroom products, some, naively thinking they're creating something great, some knowingly, using something that is cheaper, not grown on the right surface. And that's also a problem. That's kind of what you saw happen with CBD, right?
Yeah.
Became this massive trend. Mushrooms are this massive industry right now. Everyone's paying attention to them. So all these products are being created. I think everything you just shared is so important. And if everyone were to incorporate them into their products, that would be amazing. But if you had kind of like a call to action for brand founders or companies that are creating these products, it's so important for this to be done in the right way. Can you
Mhm.
just kind of share a little bit more on that?
Yeah. It's kind of the Wild West. We talk about this a lot
Yeah.
in the mushroom space. And there's a lot of people that are seeing kind of like cannabis, like, oh, this is a potential. Let me jump on this bandwagon, and not understanding how to offer these species in the way that is actually going to be beneficial. And it's so frustrating for people like us that were like, we know the potency, we know how incredible of benefits we can receive from these mushrooms. And yet, when people are only using mycelium that's grown on rice or oats, and so they're literally taking a supplement that's like 90% grain with a little bit of mushroom roots, and they're not feeling any benefit, like, of course not, right? Or using words in the cannabis industry, like full spectrum, right? We're seeing that now in the mushroom space. And it's like, we can't conflate these industries because there's completely different values and necessities to create a quality mushroom product than there are a CBD or cannabis product. So I ask for brands to offer the functional mushroom medicine, putting it all in big sentence, to really honor the way that they've been used for thousands of years. As an herbalist, this is really, really important to me. It's like just being a conduit of carrying this medicine forward and making sure that it doesn't die. And so I think our obligation to really um, carry this on is to be humble, is to look at the past, to look at our ancestors, to look at what's worked. And then also, we can look at modern science. And lucky for us, there are thousands of really high quality, double blind, placebo controlled, randomized trials using functional mushrooms. And the efficacy shows time and time again that when we use these species in the ancient way, it's also confirmed by these modern trials to be the most efficacious. So we have modern research, we have traditional wisdom, and let's honor that. And let's actually provide the people the highest quality medicine because we need it. We really need it. You know, we look at the state of our world, and the past couple years have been so astounding for so many people, especially when it comes to connection or more disconnection, being alone in their homes and their apartments. The stress levels have skyrocketed. The need for convenience, right? We're so stressed, we're exhausted, so we need something really quick, right? We're not necessarily spending hours growing food and making our homemade meals. We're just like, give me something. I'm tired. I'm stressed. I'm just trying to get by. And so the relevancy of these mushrooms has never been higher. We if we look at what they're doing on kind of a bigger scale, if we could put them into a single category, they're adaptogens, which are incredible at supporting our stress response, right? Raising our ability to deal with stressors, which are inevitable. So we're not on this roller coaster, right? If you look at what's happening with the body when we react to a stressor, typically we have this like immediate kind of roller coaster where we're like up, our heart rate is rushing, our breath rate increases, we're sweating. There's this whole cascade of reactions happening in the body to deal with a stressor. And then inevitably, what comes up must go down. It's followed by this state of fatigue and exhaustion. And so it looks like this. And then it takes a long time for our bodies to get back to a state of homeostasis or equilibrium. And what adaptogens, including our functional mushrooms, do is they don't allow us to be that affected by the stressor to the point that we're spiked and then we need a state of exhaustion to recover. In fact, when we have adaptogens running through our system and we are exposed to the stressor, we get a little bit of an alarm state, followed by this phase of resistance that lasts a lot longer and then slowly begin to decline back to equilibrium. we're actually never spiked and we're never down to the point of, being completely fatigued. Incredible, incredible just for stress in and of itself. The other big thing in the past couple years is the need for immune support. This is, you know, we've always known, yeah, immune support is and so necessary to focus on. And yet it's never been that sexy. It's like, oh, I would rather have a nootropic, or I'd rather have this like performance enhancer. And in the past couple years, immunity has become the conversation. And there's a lot of plant medicines that are actually not recommended to take for long-term immune support, even if they're natural, right? Things like echinacea, elderberry, Oregon grapefruit, golden seal, these like hot immune herbs, they stimulate our immune system in a way that's only safe for a short period of time. And so functional mushrooms occupy this really, really unique space in that they are able to modulate our immune system, right? This is getting a little deeper, but there's this compound shared in all of our functional mushrooms called IPs, immunomodulating polysaccharides. Breaking that down, they're long sugar chains that act like cruise control for our immune system. So not only are they safe to take every day, the tradition is taking them daily for months, if not years at a time, to basically modulate. So essentially what that means is if your immune system is overactive, autoimmune bodies, the functional mushroom extract can lower that overactivity to bring your immune system into a state of balance. If your immune system is underactive, like you're vulnerable and might be living in a time of a pandemic, that same functional mushroom extract can increase immune cells to enhance your state of immunity. So, I mean, just that in and of itself, and those are the commonalities among our, few dozen primary functional mushroom species. All of those are going to be adaptogenic and immunomodulating, and then we can get into, one at a time, and they all have incredible, unique additional benefits that are supporting our brain and our energy and our sleep and our skin health, and the list goes on and on.
So Michael Pollan wrote a book. He wrote two really great books recently. One
Yes.
was How to Change Your Mind, which was really uncovering the power behind psychedelics, the history, and he covers psilocybin in that book.
Mhm.
Second book he just wrote and released was Your Mind on Plants, and it speaks a lot about caffeine. And where I'm going with this is when I read that, third of the book that is purely dedicated to caffeine, it talks about how most of the world is, caffeine is a drug. Most of the world is always on drugs. And by by just the nature of the fact that caffeine has a quarter life, I believe. I might be botching some of this. So go
Half-life,
read the
yeah.
book. Half-life, yeah. It stays in your system for, 12 hours. And most people are never off of caffeine. And why I'm mentioning this is most people that I know that have had the most benefit from mushrooms have used it to get off caffeine. And the stark difference between how they are when they're on caffeine versus when they're on mushrooms, they report being different people. Because, and I even just had an aha moment. I'm like, I drink matcha or I drink like little bits of caffeine here and there. But Michael Pollan talks about this in the book of what it does to your system, how agitated you get, and just noticing those things throughout the day. If I've had caffeine that day, am I getting a little bit more pissed off when certain things happen versus the calm like cruise that you feel like when you're on functional mushrooms
Yeah.
or, if you're microdosing psilocybin, whatever it is. But it keeps your body, it feels just like baseline.
Mhm.
And so when people ask me, how do you feel when you take mushrooms? I'm like, I just feel level. I feel zen. I feel like I'm in flow. It's easier to get into flow states. A lot of people I know that are always in flow states and have studied those, they use adaptogens, they use mushrooms
Yeah.
to get there. So I just think that's really important for people to look at because Four Sigmatic has kind of made their name or put, they've pulled people in. I would say pulled rather than pushed. They've pulled people in because of caffeine. And a lot of people use Four Sigmatic to help them reduce their coffee. Like there was a time where I only drank Four Sigmatic coffee. So I just wanted to name that because I think that's really, really interesting. And I love that that's one of your flagship products. Can you, with all of your experience, I think this is something that you and I haven't talked about before. So I'm curious to know your answer to it. with all of your work with, you've worked with hundreds of patients and used mushrooms as the primary, you know, medicine to help them for various different things. Can you just talk a little bit about some case studies or like really fascinating things that you've seen happen with mushrooms? I know there's like, you know, very particular things you can and cannot say, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
And I've actually talked to a few other brand founders that we know about this. Um, so I'll make this part quick, but there's so many powerful benefits of mushrooms. However, there's very, very limited things that you can say about them because of FDA guidelines and things like that. So whatever you are allowed to share about the magical, case studies that you've seen, I would love to hear more about.
Great. So when we think about what mushrooms are doing in our body, we have to kind of reshape the framework that we're coming to it from. Because in the West, we've been raised in a system where we treat symptoms primarily, right? This is allopathic medicine, or the primary system of Western medicine, where we have a headache and we treat the headache. It doesn't matter what body is experiencing the headache. A headache is a headache is a headache. And the NSAID, for example, the nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug like ibuprofen, is going to treat that headache. When it comes to mushrooms, remember, we're tapping into this ancient wisdom, and the way they work in our body is not a pill for an ill. And so what that means is there's a matchmaking that happens. First and foremost, we have to recognize that each body is unique. And in all traditional systems of medicine, there's been this understanding. It's like, and typically it's based on the elements. So in Ayurveda, there's 3 doshas, right? 3 doshas are body types. We have Pitta, which is fire. We have Kapha, which is earth. We have Vata, which is air. In traditional Chinese medicine, there's 4 temperaments. In the Western tradition of herbal medicine I was trained in, called the Vitalist tradition, there's 4 constitutions. Essentially, they are operating on moisture and on temperature. So every body is either on the scale of moist or dry and hot or cold. And based on what we eat, where we live, how much we exercise, this baseline constitution can shift a bit. But the way that we treat ourselves and what natural medicines that we take are going to depend on our baseline constitution, because every mushroom, every plant has its own constitution. Right? This is more obvious in the plant world. It's like cayenne is really hot and dry, or ginger is really hot and dry. Something like aloe vera is really cool and moist, right? But every single plant has its own constitution. Every human has its own constitution. So I can definitely talk about some healing stories, but I want us to shift that framework to understand that it's more like a matchmaking. So if you are listening and you have some sort of condition that has been labeled, which I also don't really believe in the labels, because I think we get attached to those labels and then they become us, rather than I'm experiencing a symptom, and no matter what the outward symptom is, that's just the body's expression of trying to tell us something deeper.
Just on that point, like the amount of diseases and things that I have been told that I have that is not, they weren't accurate. Maybe they were accurate for that time and point in my life, but it was more like the terrain of my body at that time.
Yeah.
And it's like fixing the gut, fixing the microbiome. I've been told I'm allergic to eggs. I've been told I'm allergic to fish. I've been, all of these things, or various different, it's a long list. But point being, once I fixed the terrain with different things like mushrooms and herbs and adaptogens, then you can reincorporate things that used to bother you, because it's less about, I am X. It's more about where are you at in that point in your life,
Exactly. And so what I see when someone like you or someone else that has, you're not alone. So many people have been like, I have all these symptoms and everyone is telling me something else. What do I do? And the more we try to target those symptoms and ignore the root, the more those symptoms are just going to change and morph. And you can get really confused of like, wait, I thought I was allergic to eggs and I cut out eggs and now I'm experiencing something else. And so in both Ayurveda and TCM, and I keep bringing these up because TCM and Ayurveda are the second and third largest systems of medicine still practiced on the planet today. Ayurveda is the oldest, about 5,000 years old. TCM is the second oldest, 3,500-year-old. So there's a lot of depth and history and clinical experience and trials in these two systems. And what they both have in common, and I think we're kind of like remembering this in the West, is everything comes from a state of imbalance. So it's not as if um, you are your symptom. Rather, if you're experiencing a symptom, there's something in your foundation that is off kilter. And so if we can support the chi, the life force, the vitality, and if we can nourish that place in our body, it's incredible what symptoms begin to resolve themselves.
Mm.
And there could still be symptoms, but at least if we've treated the stress response, the gut health, the immune system, these really foundational parts of our body, we get a much clearer picture of what still remains instead of those symptoms coming from a place of lack. It's like, oh, there's a rocky foundation under here. And so it's like all these things are like rocks flying and like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to grab onto. And we're really addicted to naming experiences, right? This is like human nature, but especially in the West, we're like, we can't just look at a tree and be like, oh, experience it for what it is. It's like we're initially being like, that has green leaves, or there's a flower here, or there's bark, or what. Like, we need to identify it. And so we create our own subjective experience based on it. And I think the more we can kind of disconnect, which is a lot of what our psychedelic medicine teaches us too, is really widening our understanding and opening this narrow perspective into like, whoa, what else is here? And can I observe that thing? And I think if we take that approach to our bodies, there's so much wisdom that can happen. And I really believe, and I've seen time and time again, how mushrooms stoke that inner vitality. They give us the tools without having to do very much to start healing and to start raising this vitality so symptoms can go away. And it's really interesting. I'm just thinking about all these conditions, and I can't say like this has been cured ever. We have a lot of restrictions, as you mentioned. But if the body is no longer experiencing symptoms of, say, Lyme disease or Crohn's disease, like, does that body still have that ailment? I don't know, right? Sure, it depends on our labeling system, but ideally, we're just raising the vitality again so the symptoms are no longer present. And I hope we can start looking at our body that way instead of like, okay, what can I treat and what's wrong with me and what labels do I have? It's like, let's raise our chi, let's raise our vitality because our body knows how to heal and our body wants to heal.
I think it's really important for people to understand. And there's so much more that we could talk about on this subject. I'm going to make you late for a Four Sigmatic team meeting otherwise. So we'll wrap it up fairly quickly. But I think that's really, if people can grasp that concept of if you are labeled with something like Lyme disease or an autoimmune disease, like that label is not permanent. It can be fixed through modalities like this. And just to look into what is the root cause. And that is, you know, the best people I know are all root cause practitioners and healers. So I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah. And just want to remind people that we have allies. Sometimes it can feel really isolating, especially in autoimmune conditions. Like there's a whole body, mind, spirit component where you often feel you can't trust your body. And that's really scary, right? When your body is the one attacking itself. So it said. And so I think it's really important to remember that these mushrooms or these plants, you know, if you're looking at other adaptogens, they're allies. Like they're here to help us and we don't have to do anything on our own. We've never been able to heal on our own without the support of community, of food, of, you know, plant fungal medicine. And so just, I hope that brings a sense of relief of like, there's so much out there that is here to support and we can tap into that. Like this is accessible for the first time in many hundreds of years. You know, these species used to be illegal for common people to use or only reserved for the royal family or had to be traded as currency, and they're accessible now. And that's so exciting and we need them. And so it's really just that gap between, okay, I need these, they're accessible, that bridge of education, which we're both so passionate about, to get people the allies that they need to heal.
And you've made them taste good and put them in fun little packets, which is great. Okay, this is all amazing. so much more to come. There's like a million things that I wanted to dive into that we didn't get to cover, but that's totally fine. Like I said, you are one of the most educated people I know on mushrooms overall, and also I think your deep understanding of how to really use them because you've used them with people for so long is it's so important. So I'm really excited that you do the work that you do and that you're sharing all these messages every day. So last three questions, we'll do like three rapid fire baby questions before we leave.
Cool.
What's next for you? Like what is, the main thing that you're excited about, whether it be personal work, your work at Four Sigmatic, and then leading into our next question of where people can find you.
Mm-hmm. I'm working on a book, which is really exciting. And so stay tuned. It actually won't be out until September 2022, but it's a really accessible guide. It's the guide that I wish I had when I was diving into this work 10 years ago. And I just hope it serves as kind of a reference for people that don't know where to start. They want to learn the history of these species. They want to learn how to vet them. It's a really practical guide. So it's like, how do I choose the right product, choose the right dosage? What should I be aware of that's shady in the marketplace? And it goes through 21 of my favorite plant and fungal species. So that's been the big project lately, and I can't wait to share it with the world.
Okay. Can't wait to read it. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you online and Four Sigmatic as well?
Yeah, personally, my website is danielleryanwellness.com, and you can find me at Danielle Ryan Broida on social channels. And Four Sigmatic, you can find us at Four Sigmatic on all social, as well as foursigmatic.com.
Amazing. Okay, last question for you. And we have 6 minutes until your next call. So if you had to, you covered a lot of life lessons here that mushrooms have taught you and the wisdom that you've learned from them. But if you had to pick your favorite of what mushrooms have shown you through the intelligence that we know that they have, that you've applied to your life, what would you say?
I can only choose one mushroom species.
Oh, no. You can choose, they can be mushrooms as a whole, but the lesson that they've taught you overall, like whether it be from the mycelium network and the way that they operate, like what is one life lesson that you've learned from your study of mushrooms?
We spoke about this earlier as we started this conversation, but the lesson is the contagious excitement. And it feels like we're just growing our mycelial network together. And I teach mycology. And so I just was in Boulder, Colorado last week teaching my students. And the joy that comes, it's like this aha, where it's like this missing link that I think we've all known, like in our gut. I don't know, there's something that doesn't quite make sense. And when we start understanding the world of fungi, there's something that clicks. And it's not 100% of the puzzle, but there's something that's like, okay, this makes sense. This resonates. This is sparking joy. And there's this like enthusiasm that comes. And I see it, with you. I see it with so many students. I see it with clients of Four Sigmatic that they're like, oh my gosh, this works. This is real and it's safe and it's natural and it's age old and time tested. And there's very few things that we can feel that like, pardon my French, but like fuck yes to on all these different levels. Typically we have to compromise somewhere. And it's like, yeah, this works, but it has like a really high carbon footprint. Or like, yeah, this works, but there might be these side effects. And like compromising. And with fungi, we don't see that as much. It's like we can experience benefits and we don't have to then, have some sort of consequence later. And there's something so magical about that, right? And it feels like we're just learning that that's a potential way to live, is that we don't have to have a tit for a tat, but that we can kind of have vitality and health and we deserve that. So yeah, I don't know how to sum that up, but
I would sum it up as mushrooms are a fuck yes across the board.
Perfect.
And no, this was amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you were able to be one of our first guests, and I can't wait to watch everything that you do and to be a part of it and collaborate.
Likewise. Thank you.
Much love.
Much love.
Thanks for diving into the multiverse with us. If you're interested in being a featured guest on the show, sponsorship, partnership, or you're just mushroom curious, we're always looking to expand our mycelium network. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Into the Multiverse, where you can find clips from this podcast, psychedelic legalization news, events that we're doing, and so much more. We've also created our own in-house consumer lifestyle brand called Super Mush. We make mushroom mouth sprays. We make a whole line of mushroom streetwear. You can find it on Instagram at Supermush or online at supermush.com. We'll see you next week. Much love.